Where does one begin with a franchise this long running? It stands the test of time alongside its fellow strategy games like Final Fantasy Tactics and the most recent games like Unicorn Overlord. It's had a rather slippery slope of highs and lows, but it's full of wonder, curiosity, and lawsuits. It's a lot to cover in such a time and era, but Fire Emblem is many things. A strategy game, a gacha, and even an anime during the mid-90s.
Sorry, but I'm listening now.
This. I still don't understand why they wanted this. It's all one big capital F franchise that has a long-standing timeline of developer history, struggles, and even a resounding success in the end. But first, we need to rewind the clock a bit to cover the basics here. We need to establish the beginnings of this series in 1990. This is it. These are the beginnings of the series that go back to the year 1990 with the ever so interesting Shozo Kaga and his team. The team was also co-developed with Intelligent Systems, who wished to take a break from making extra hardware for the Famicom and actually start making some games. Their goals were in mind by 1987, and it took 3 years for what they wanted to get right and make it work. The team even had to create a whole new chip for the game's cartridge to even be able to handle and display the very text that one player is able to read while going throughout the story and chapter maps. And with Yuka Tsujiyoko on the music side of things to help create music, they made tracks that still hold up to this day as many smaller jingles and even very solid battle themes. All of this work landed this team the window of opportunity to make the game that we now know as Fire Emblem. The art team was composed of the artists Toru Osawa, Naotaka Onishi, Satoshi Machida, and Toshitaka Maramatsu. These designs for all the characters had the charm of their time. I mean, just look at the late 80s anime and you'll see all sorts of possible inspirations for the art team. This did mean that it would mean a lot for the team, especially for the designs, to then be handled for the pixelated portraits of the console. Here, we have our protagonist, Prince Marth. The standards of anime cover boy still showing through the sprite work. Now we get the grizzled veteran Jagen, wrinkles still visible in the pixels. Even characters like Gordon. Oh my god, what the fuck did they do to the boy? On to gameplay, handled by the dev team at Intelligent Systems, led by programmer Toru Naruhiro. The game has quirks galore. Very much so when one comes from the newer entries to try and play the original to experience the history of this franchise. This includes many simple features, such as movements of units throughout their ability to move distances based on their classes and their capabilities. As a strategy RPG, the stats and numbers still hold a very high priority, but tactics will help any player be triumphant. In a lot of ways, this gameplay remains simple to this very day and age because of the ways the teams that lead the games want to tell their stories of war. Keeping something simple like this for so long has its perks, saves time and budget for the other high-end stuff that would come in later, as many could and would say. But even as someone like me kept playing the game, I slowly realized the age of the game. There were no trails that helps you dictate where you were going. There were no grids, just the map, your unit, the enemy, and the environmental tiles. This simplicity can make a series beginner or even a more modern player feel lost at first. But this simplicity of moving characters does stay as the staple of the franchise for a while, even to the gacha game of all things. But when this applies to the limitations, it's entirely true to see how it was like this for as long as it was. It was a product of its time, yes, but it stood out with tactical gameplay that was highly responsive and was able to make claims where it could. So, how's the story? Basic. It's simple, but made to be as such through limitations. When the lore expands, it comes from the later entries, showing more aspects and growing of the world for this particular entry. The world of Fire Emblem can be described as more like a beginner's fantasy setting. Dragons, magic, blessed weapons, Pegasi. It's a feast of Western fantasy, but now handled with a major anime flair that separates it from most of the Western market. But for Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, we get the story of Prince Marth of Arcanea, a runaway prince that has been forced into this life of refuge alongside his comrades of Draug, Cain, Abel, Gordon, and Jagan. His kingdom of Arcanea had been ruined by the earth dragon Mereos, now going mad with power as a dragon. Marth is meant to go about the country, freeing people from the grip of Mereos and his minions with his own leadership, curiosity, and charisma. As Marth goes on, he'd eventually fight an immense battle to then claim the one tool to slay Mereos, the legendary
Falcion!
This should not have even been dubbed. But it's actually the Falchion. This blade of light, this hope put within forged steel, blessed by the divine dragon Naga. It's all coming together to be used by Marth to put an end to the reign of Mereos. When all is said and done, Mereos is slain, peace is restored to the realm, and Marth is able to let the realm of Arcanea be rebuilt better than before. This story, even when simple, is elevated by the characters. Stated by Shozo Kaga himself through an interview.
I love strategy games like that too, but I also love RPGs. By adding RPG elements, I wanted to create a game where the player could get more emotionally invested in what's happening. Conversely, one of the drawbacks of RPGs is that there's always just a single protagonist. Thus, to a certain extent, you can only experience the linear story that the game creator has prepared for you.
This man, the main designer, writer, and conceptualizer of this franchise, wanted emotional moments, characters being able to become relatable, cared for, and defined clearer as time went on throughout the games. And people cared. People reset the console just to restart the map and save whomever they lost. Even I myself did this several times when playing the later entries, specifically the Game Boy Advance titles. There had been the design that he wished to fulfill, and it worked. It worked well, and it would continue to be proven for years to come. Ah, the second game, the Black Sheep, as some call it. The story of destined love and conflicts fought in the names of gods. It's a game that did get a remake later in the form of Echoes, Shadows of Valentia in 2017, showing dedication of the people who enjoyed the original in the form of this one remake. With Shozo Kaga again at the helm, we would see this game become a Black Sheep quickly by adding dungeons, entire exploring sections for villages and bases. Already, there is a massive shift for not just the gameplay, but even the art direction. Taking only 2 years to develop, Gaiden would come out to the Japanese public on the Famicom in 1992. Still not reaching mass acclaim, but still showing the potential of the franchise to many that did play it. The dev team was still Kaga and his art team of Naotaka Onishi, Satoshi Machida, and Toshitaka Muramatsu, even bringing back Tsujiyoko as composer of music, and even Gunpei Yokoi as the producer. Meanwhile, for Shadows of Valentia, Kaga had been far removed at this point from intelligence systems. Leading the charge on the remake was Hitoshi Yamagami. Yamagami wanted to remake Gaiden with the intent to refine it, add more to it, and even broaden the scope of the involvement of the duo of Alm and Celica, the lords of this game. The team is now composed of Satoko Kurihara as writer, Hidari and Akio Shimada as artists, and Takeru Kanazaki, Yasuhisa Baba, Takafumi Wada, and Sho Murakami as composers for the soundtrack. Shadows of Valentia would be a staple for one of the most unique and satisfying remakes most would see, selling over 1 million copies. The game even further adds more characters for more plot-driven sequences for betrayals, moments of respite, and even more characters to just live in general. Many things have been changed for the sake of convenience, yet also for the player to still experience the ideas of Gaiden story-wise, as that still remains simple, yet now having more pieces in place to allow more elements of the overexpanding world that was established in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. The art of the original was a product of 1992, having more bulkier armors and the still classic anime style for the designs of characters. Alm and Celica, our two lords in this game, hold their respective designs rather well to this day, even if they seem more clunky and not as clean as most. But once again, the designs were made simple to keep in mind for the gameplay itself. Sprites still being able to show the characters more personally does allow more showings of design to still peer through. Even for characters like Mycen, this game's Jagan, still has the designs of a veteran knight in his own sprite work. Even someone like Saber... Why? Why did these limits have to do this to my man? Looking at Shadows of Valentia, however, the art direction was able to be handled smoothly by the recruited artist Hidari. Hidari holds an immense amount of respect from all sorts of angles from fans and artists alike due to their rendering techniques and overall aesthetics for their substances. They were able to describe the world and characters with meaningful changes to the designs of the OG cast of characters, making them all stand out on their own, while still acknowledging their designs one way or another from the original. Some were subtle, others were drastic. I mean, just look at Gray, Cliff, and Tobin. They now have far more proper village vibes, and even have more of a distinct difference to help one distinguish them on the fields of battle when all you can see is their sprites on the map. The way this team handled the remake in this department is nothing short of sublime, and still brings the charm of the original game with it. As for the gameplay, what else can I say? Don't fix what isn't broken. The same problems can stick with Gaiden, especially the ways of not having guided ideas of where units were able to go, except for the amount of space they could move. The simplicity remains there and still handles what it can. For what it is worth, though, comes from the further application of strategy with story-based elements of play. Re-roaming was what made this game unique from the rest. A world map that would be brought back multiple times for the series to have ideas of where the armies were at any given time on any given day. It's a very cool way to show progress as well, especially tied with story elements to give the player a really effective amount of respite after an intense boss. The concept of multiple armies in control of the player isn't new for some games of this time, but for 1992, the separate armies of Ulm and Celica have such a unique tie-in for the story to then be able to see the full potential of crafted synergy for the final battle. The classes of both armies being able to mash well with the other major roles in this game still impress me to this day, and get many players theory crafting on all sorts of methods to take down the final boss. This theory crafting and player expression gets even more expanded and dive deeper when Shadows of Valentia came out, giving 4 characters at the beginning with a blank slate. Turn Tobin into a mage, turn Gray into a mercenary, turn Cliff into a cavalry. The world in this game became your oyster by your own decisions for combat. The explorer mindset gets expanded as well, now with there being a Z-axis in mind for the presentation department. Dungeons are now bigger, still allowing grinding spots for many to be able to take the turns to grind levels for said use. And then there's a controversial mechanic that would be intriguing to see used once again for when another game would be made. What I'm referring to is the mechanic known as Milla's Turn Wheel, a mechanic that is adapted in later entries into a staple mechanic. It's a tactical tool, more or less, meaning to help the player rewind entire turns in order to redo or replay entire maps if something goes wrong in the combat side of gameplay. Many players had mixed feelings about this one mechanic, seeing it as a crutch for some on top of the casual mode that had been added to the DS remakes of Shadow Dragon and its sequel. Nakanishi in a developer interview stated that,
"It's sort of like a simplified version of resetting and trying again. After all, when you lose a unit and reset, you have to do it all again from the start. But with this method, you can trace the mistakes step by step."
Kusakihara would also state in the same interview that,
"We thought Milla's Turn Wheel would add a fun new dimension to the strategy aspect. In Fates, there was a Phoenix mode, where you could proceed without any worry. However, that meant when someone made a blunder, they would not have time to reflect on how to improve upon that mistake. Using Milla's Turn Wheel, you can adjust your tactics to find a solution for a situation through trial and error, allowing you to enjoy strategy in a way not possible before."
the intent of the mechanic was to allow newer players to enjoy this older story that has been refined for the modern day. The grit of a war story meant to be played with a dash of mythology and folklore-like aspects, such as the gods of the realm having stakes and claims on lands. Even having something like this device that the turn wheel envelops shows a sense of responsibility in holding that power, limiting your usages on top of that, and only upgrading as you go about the game. Overall, gameplay-wise, both Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia show that a Black Sheep title does not mean a franchise has not improved, or been shifted so much. In fact, I enjoyed the exploration bits, showing more aspects for the player to see within the setting of the game, Valentia. and it's only elevated more by an amazing aesthetic and a really wonderful handled music score on top of it all. The story is heavily expanded upon in Shadows of Valentia compared to the original Gaiden, but the story follows their two fate-bound souls, Alm and Celica, as they learn to lead, grow, and topple the old traditions of Valentia through letting humanity rule themselves instead of their gods. The ideas follow these two through their trials and tribulations, leading their groups about the continent through brigands and pirates to armies and cultists as they make their way throughout the countries of Sofia and Rigel. Without much else though, the story is split into 5 acts. Not as many chapters as the initial game, but each major battle was more like a standard chapter-by-chapter map, still allowing those who played the previous game to understand the formula. As for how it holds up, the Gaiden portion is not much, still simple for the sake of console limitations. As for Shadows of Valentia, it's a lot. It adds so much more depth in ways that allow more to be built upon the entire series, at least when applying the games that take place within the realm of Arcanea. This remake adds an entire prologue to expand upon Alm and Celica even more. This also introduces us to the overall dynamics of everyone before their genuine Act 1 starts, when the story truly lets the player loose out into the world. It's a story that now adds more context and breadth to the overarching narrative of war and gods. It allowed so much more to be made clear about character relationships, especially since they added the support system to the characters that allowed said interactions. Entirely fully rendered cutscenes that just ooze the detailed works of Hidari, but as 3D models, fully continued to sell the range of emotions the story wanted to tell from its original release. All in all, this remake did what it sought out to do in spades. And it shows. To begin this tale of the third game, we start in 1992, immediately after the release of Gaiden. The Super Famicom had been out for 2 years at this point, and Kaga wanted in on this 16-bit pie, alongside Intelligent Systems. This would lead to 2 separate ideas on what to do for the supposed sequel to Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, one of which was to remake Shadow Dragon, while the other was purely to make the sequel. When push came to shove, however, both plans would be done at once, making a pseudo-remake of Shadow Dragon as Book 1, and the new story of Mystery of the Emblem as the sequel storyline to the former. Once fully made, it would be released in 1994 for the Super Famicom in all its glory, with the original gameplay loop in mind and a slightly lower difficulty for newer audiences to try the series. This title held the best sales margin of the franchise until Fire Emblem Awakening, having sold over a total of 770,000 units by 2002. This, too, got a remake just like Shadow Dragon in the form of New Mystery of the Emblem in 2010 for the DS. The art of Mystery of the Emblem was handled by Katsuyoshi Koya, holding a style more reminiscent of 90s anime of the time, such as Saint Seiya, so on and so forth. Every character got a fresh new coat of paint in terms of direction, and hey, look at that! Marth isn't just wearing a tunic and sandals anymore. Now look at him. He's wearing a proper set of garb and pants with a curé and a set of shoulder pads. It's the design that he would be known for the rest of time, being adapted in many art styles and variants from here on out. And, I mean, hey, the sprites now reflect this style change as well, everyone getting a glow-up in one way or another. But now for gameplay. We carry on the same loop as the first game. Chapter-by-chapter maps and a lot of strategic planning still stay in the loop. But now, that thing that changes the whole game around is now being able to see how many spacers your units can move. Holy hell, they did it by Game 3. Either way, this now allows many players to understand the movement systems, unlike the past games that did not have such a thing. It's a revolutionary addition to the mechanics of the games from here on out, as they will become more expanded and allow for further insight into the maps and the plans for how and where to move your units for your perfect victories. Just the same as before as well, resetting is not frowned upon, since some of the difficulty still remains once you get to Book 2, the real Mystery of the Emblem, as it now expects you to know what you need to know in order to come out on top. So, reasonably, I'd have to say that for a Super Famicom strategy RPG, Mystery of the Emblem stands out as a really well-handled game on its mechanics and allowance of time for player understanding. Now, what do you do for the story? Well, Book 1 is just Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, just refined now for the sake of a newer audience to understand it without having to go back a console generation. But what of Book 2? What of the true mystery of the emblem? Well, the events of Book 2 happen 2 years after the first. Hardin, an ally of Marth from Shadow Dragon, keeps conquering new lands with Marth and his friends. Marth realizes there might be something wrong with Hardin, and is soon branded as a traitor by Hardin. Marth's closest confidants and allies never leave his side, allowing a small pocket of resistance to form. Marth is then given the Fire Emblem, the main story's MacGuffin, by Princess Nina. Once Marth and his allies are able to meet with their old ally Goto, they would soon be able to gather the other stones that allow the Fire Emblem to then nullify the evils corrupting Hardin, which was through the Dark Sphere that Garneth had given Hardin. This is where it gets interesting. If you do not have the 5 spheres before ending Hardin, the game will have a premature end, leaving Marth to then fight another war with Medeus. But if all 5 spheres are there, the Fire Emblem becomes the binding shield, able to seal away evil and darkness. Garneth...
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Garneth kidnaps several clerics, one being Nina, and the other being Elise, Marth's sister. After slaying Garneth and obtaining the falchion once more, Marth fully slays Medeus, putting a proper end to the evils of the world. Marth and Sheeta get a happy ending here, marrying and ruling Arcanea together as king and queen, happily ever after. Mystery of the Emblem is still regarded as a wonderful game, still praised for the lower difficulty, powerful story, and even well-handled character development from Marth as the leader in hiding and Hardin as the manipulated tyrant. It's a well-done game through and through, and Kaga intended it for it to be as such. Kaga wanted this to be the last game set in Arcanea. This remained the case until Shadow Dragon and the Mystery of the Emblem remakes for the DS, but also then Awakening in 2012 and 2013, having Arcanea gain a over 1,000-year time skip and history of events that shaped the world into what people would now know as Elise. And while many cannot play Mystery of the Emblem through normal means, there do exist fan translation projects that allow many newcomers to at least try it for themselves. The Gilded Game. The praised one. The one that should have been remade by now. Genealogy of the Holy War is the most impactful war story one may ever just read off from the scripted sequences alone. Made for the Super Famicom in 1996, it would come to critical acclaim in the Famitsu magazine with multiple high ratings of 8s and 9s out of 10, but only selling just over 490,000 units by 2002. It was a rough seller, but pulled through still with Kaga at the helm of designing and writing this world out. No longer in Arcanea, we focus on Jugdral, a new continent of country-wide wars. This will include bigger chapter maps to bring such a grander scale to the very CRTs that one player could ever play on. It was a grander war of compassion, relations, parenthood, and even further so, we even get moments of brotherhood, trust, betrayal, and regret. This game has a lot, so you better strap into those seats, or just lay down on the bed with snacks in hand. The art was once again handled by the team of Katsuyoshi Koya, and this time with a newcomer, Mayumi Hirota. This style holds true to the aesthetics that could remind anyone of shows like Ranma 1/2, Saint Seiya, etc. Its character designs hold charm, and even more so a sense of style in terms of clothes. Characters pop more in this entry due to the range of clothes and armor many of them even wear. Take Sigurd and Beowulf for our examples of range of clothes and armor. Sigurd holds more regality, showing more in line with the roles of a general leader type of character, cape and all. Meanwhile, Beowulf has the more practical armor side of this all, covering where he needs in order to fight without much worry, his armor allowing all necessary movements for precise strikes as well as showing his expertise in combat. It's these sorts of designs that pop out to people, showing what they can do for those who like to analyze what they can in order to infer more about certain characters and what makes them who they are in the story, both in role and in personality. Gameplay for this has been praised, and even more so held in high regards to having a staple introduced within this entry. This one mechanic has been both the bane of someone's experience, or the most crucial in their victory. Yes, I'm talking about the weapon triangle is one of the more unique things that makes Fire Emblem what it is. It's more or less like rock, paper, scissors, having swords, lances, and axes having a unique set of bonuses and negative effects take place when in opposition of one another. When a sword goes against a lance, the sword has disadvantage. When a lance goes against an axe, the axe just wins. And when an axe goes up against the sword holds the point. But why is that? It may be interesting to see it in the light of a more medieval context. Let's say that a skilled sword is able to fight many a foe, able to hold their own, yet they cannot beat the range of a lance, and are therefore impaled. While a lance is wielded by a trained soldier, one does not expect the low blows of a bandit or clever ruffian who wields but an axe, and the bandit is not well trained enough to handle a swordsman who is competent at slaying their fellow man. That's more or less how the weapon triangle works, as a way to show more in-depth combat decisions, seeing this warfare as genuine warfare compared to other titles. Aside from this one major addition to combat, you get the standard Fire Emblem gameplay loop, growing your units into this ultimate death squad that can dish out damage and sweep brigands off their feet in no time at all. Even other newer mechanics were added for player expression, and even more so for difficulty. This further applies to the feature known as Leadership Stars. This mechanic allows enemy AI to more or less have a spike in difficulty. The man himself, Shozo Kaga, would be interviewed and state that,
"That's the enemy AI being made stupid on purpose. If the enemy leader has less leadership stars, then their subordinates will also act stupidly as well. Since Eldegon, for example, is a skilled commander, his troops were also made strong to match."
These systems of player expression also got further expanded by the means of the Holy Blood system, allowing one's own inner fanfic writer to come out and have the units of Book 1 have marriages with one another to then make the kids that would grow up to be the next generation of fighters in Book 2. Oh yeah, speaking of that, we do this song and dance again. The story of this game is dense. I'm talking too densely packed for one's own good, even being directly tied to the next game, Thracia 776. The story starts more or so with a timeline of events, even stated in interviews with staff to be set hundreds of years before Arcanea, letting divine dragons still look over humanity before their interferences. But one did not follow such directives, that being Lopter, who would go on to possess a priest and cause immense chaos. Naga, yes, that Naga, had heard of the tyrannical nature of Lopter and chose 12 soldiers to become her crusaders, each gaining a holy weapon. All of them fought valiantly, ending Lopter, but not for long. This then leads to the crusaders each making their own countries, leading to the full setting of Jugdral. Yes, that was only an abridged version of the beginning timeline information to establish certain functions in the scale of the world. When the game truly begins, we take the mantle of Sigurd, a nobleman that helps try and calm down the ongoing bandit issue within the country of Granvale, being held by allies such as Arvis, Lex, and even Sir Quan, the father of Thracia's protagonist. This leads into several chapters of gaining new allies, rescuing those who were innocent, and putting ends to an entire... Oh, that is a thing. The hunting of civilians from the cult of Lopter. Yep, they're back. And, hey, as we go along the path, we then meet Deirdre, a woman whose beauty would entice Sigurd, eventually blossoming into a romance like none other, bountiful with care, support, and the birth of their son, Salif. But this romance and peace would not last long, as Deirdre would soon be kidnapped by one of Sigurd's closest confidants and friends, Arvis. With Deirdre's memories wiped, she does not recall the man that would stand before her when Sigurd and his army arrived back in Granvale. Arvis soon fully commences his betrayal, killing the first generation of fighters, allies, and yes, even Sigurd in the flames of a powerful spell. "15 years pass, and we arrive in the POV of Book 2. Seliph, son of Sigurd and Deirdre. Seliph is still a boy whose sword prowess is almost on par with his father, and he sets off and quells the multitudes of enemy forces. As the events of the story play out, we see the eventual current state of Arvis, slowly showing this growth of regret. Arvis, too, would have 2 children with Deirdre, those being Julia, the daughter, and Julius, the son. Each child was given the power of the divine dragons of Naga and Lopter, Julia being Naga, and Julius being Lopter. In the final chapters, Arvis would die from health-related causes, leading Julius to lead, which Julius does not mourn the death of his father. In the final battle, everyone faces off against the Dreadlords, these false fighters that resemble the 12 original Crusaders, as Seliph and Julia soon force further inside. Julius is defeated, releasing Lopter, and Seliph would be face to face with the forces of darkness. With his might and blood of Naga, he defeats Lopter, ending the Divine Dragon for good. Genealogy of the Holy War is an immense game, with large maps, fantastic challenging mechanics, and even more so, characters to care about. The Holy War, however, was not the end of it all, as somewhere else in Jugdral was now a separate conflict of a rebellion led by the son of Sir Quan, a boy by the name of Leif. Thracia 776, the hardest game of the entire franchise, and the midquel to Genealogy of the Holy War. This is the last time we see Kaga in the director's chair. But this game would be released on the Super Famicom in 2000, and would be the last game that would be released on a home console until Path of Radiance for the GameCube in 2005. This game would show the slight bit of declining sales for the series as a whole, the struggles seemingly coming from possibly the release windows being closer to the end of the lifespan of the console it had been on. Aside from that, it is still regarded as one of the many games that can challenge any tactical mind, especially going off of those who would have played Genealogy beforehand. Art direction was still handled by Mayumi Hirota, now being assisted by Masahiro Higuchi. The art still holds so much of the aesthetic we have now grown to love over the Super Famicom days, growing more into the developing style and refinement of Hirota's style. Each character's renders still hold well and up to this day, showing the personalities where they could, since the development of characters seems to have been declined slightly in favor of the gameplay. Speaking of which, gameplay-wise, we bring forth 2 final new mechanics that only increase the overall difficulty. That being this god-forsaken mist and fog is the death of so many characters from all sorts of players. This one feature covers the map in this dense fog that denies the player much visibility in certain areas, and will only reveal the way dependent on the movement and attack ranges of your units. This feature covers up enemies en masse, able to hide entire battalions of armored units that can then capture your allies. What is capturing? Capturing is the mechanic that allows enemies and allies to capture units that will then allow you to not only move the enemy elsewhere, but even steal inventory items for yourself. As a slight benefit, the rescue mechanic is an option to get allied units out of tight spots. Rescue is mostly used by cavalier units to move mages and healers out of the far more dangerous zones of enemies. And yes, while capture is a hard mechanic to handle and use effectively, it sure is an annoyance when I'm trying to get through this goddamn... Aside from this, the gameplay loop remains relatively the same from the rest of the franchise, keeping all sorts of strategic thinking in mind, and still using the systems built up to this point. As the old saying goes, don't fix what isn't broken. The story remains the simplest as it can get from here, taking place during the second generation of Genealogy, focusing on the son of Quan, Leif. Leif would be able to lead a smaller resistance army to retake his father's homeland, allowing for more defense of this country from the Granvale Empire's forces throughout other events of genealogy. As the rebellion succeeds in battle after battle, Leif would have final showdowns against Raedric and Veld, after which Veld later shifts into Deadlord Moose. After this battle, Leif would centralize his forces in Munster, defending it and the northern border of Thracia from possible invasion. Again, relatively more bare bones, as this game more or less has more of an approach to be a side-by-side type of deal, going alongside genealogy in order to expand the war story for both games as a whole. And, in all honesty, that is what was told rather well, even if it had to be more bare of more in-depth elements of the story. And this, my friends, ends part 1 of 3 for this series of videos. This covers the Kaga Emblem games, from Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light to Thracia 776. And I hope you've enjoyed this slight deep dive into how this all panned out for Kaga and his team. Speaking of Shozo Kaga, this is where we talk about his legacy, and what had happened to him after the fact. After the release of Thracia, Shozo Kaga would leave, not feeling satisfied with Nintendo over the next ideas that they had suggested. After his leave, he would go on to make Tirnanog, his own game studio that would make Emblem Saga. Right. This is the lawsuit I mentioned at the very beginning. Nintendo would sue Kaga for the ideas and similarities his new game, now titled Tearing Saga, would have compared to Fire Emblem. These lawsuits hold odd manners on what had happened after the second time this happened, with Kaga now paying the price in terms of his relationships with Nintendo. As time went on, Kaga would make one other game with his company as a sequel to Tearing Saga, titled Barrack Saga, for the PS2. Unfortunately, because of the souring relationship with Nintendo, this mess of courts and lawsuits, Kaga would not even be mentioned in the making-of book for the franchise that he had made. Kaga does continue to make games to this day, but now mostly by himself, making the newly made Vestaria Saga in 2016 after a decade-long hiatus. The franchise of Fire Emblem would not be one to lay down just yet, still holding on and writing amazing stories where they could. This even comes to play with a very certain fighting game on the GameCube that would help establish the franchise of Fire Emblem even more to the West, before the West even got its first official game. But for where we are now, I just have to say that we have done some video game history. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.